Halloween is a holiday celebrated each year on October 31, and Halloween 2020 will occur on Saturday. This tradition originated with the ancient Celtic festival on Samhain, when people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off ghosts. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designed November 1 as a time to honor All Saints. Soon, All Saints' Day incorporated some of the traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows' Eve, and later Halloween. Over time, Halloween evolved into a day of activities like trick-or-treating, carving jack-o'-lanterns, festive gatherings, donating costumes, and eating treats. In the beginning, this day marked the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of the dark, cold winter, a time of year that was often associated with humanity. Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. On the night of October 31, they celebrate Samhain, when it was believed that the ghosts of the dead returned to Earth. Some of the most popular characters we see on this day are witches, vampires, and werewolves. Let's begin with the witches. Witches were perceived as evil beings by early Christians in Europe. Inspired the iconic Halloween figure, early ones were people who practiced witchcraft, using magic spells and calling upon spirits for help or to bring about change. Most witches were thought to be pagans doing the devil's work. Many, however, were simply natural healers or so-called wise women, whose voice of profession was misunderstood, causing the well-known witch purge where people of this time fell into mass hysteria and killing witches as a result. Most of these so-called witches were innocent, but unfortunately, these people of that time were so close-minded and act as they were in mere influence, turning into the biggest massive murder of all times. Even though it was in the name of God, the most famous one was the Salem witch trials, as witch hysteria decreased in Europe. It grew in New World, which was realigned from wars between the French and British, a smallpox epidemic, and the ongoing fear of attacks from neighboring Native American tribes.
The tense atmosphere was ripe for finding scapegoats. Probably the best known witch trials took place in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. The Salem witch trials began when 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams began suffering from fits, body contortions, and uncontrolled screaming. Today, it is believed that they were poisoned by a fungus that caused spasms and delusions. As more young women began to exhibit symptoms, mass hysteria ensued, and 3 women were accused of witchcraft: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, an enslaved woman owned by Paris's father. Tituba confessed to being a witch and began accusing others of using black magic. On June 10, Bridget Bishop became the first accused witch to be put to death during the Salem witch trials, when she was hanged at the Salem gallows. Ultimately, around 150 people were accused and 18 were put to death. Women weren't the only victims of the Salem witch trials. 6 men were also convicted and executed. Werewolves are also mythological animals and the subject of many histories throughout the world, and more than a few nightmares. Werewolves are, according to some legend, people who morph into vicious, powerful wolves. Others are mutant combinations of human and a wolf, but all of them are bloodthirsty beasts who cannot control their lust for killing people and animals. It is unclear exactly when and where the werewolf legend originated. Some scholars believe the werewolf made its debut in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known Western prose, when Gilgamesh jilted a potential lover because she had turned her previous mate into a wolf. Werewolves made another early appearance in Greek mythology with the legend of Lycaon. And according to the legend, Lycaon, the son of Pegasus, angered the god Zeus when he served a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. As punishment, the enraged Zeus turned Lycaon and his sons into wolves. Werewolves also emerged in early Nordic folklore. The saga of the Volsungs tells the story of a father and son who discovered wolf pits that had the power to turn people into wolves for 10 days.
The father-son do not the bells transform into the wolves and went to a killing rampage in the forest. The rampage ended when the father attacked his sons, causing a lethal wound. The son only survived because a kind of raven gave the father a leaf with killing powers. Vampires are the evil mythological beings who roam the world at night searching for people whose blood they feed upon. They may they may be the best known classic monsters of all. Most people associate vampires with the Count Dracula, the legendary blood-sucking subject Bram Stoker's epic novel. Dracula, which was published in 1897, but the history of vampires began long before Stoker was born. It struck Bram Stoker, named Count Dracula after Vlad Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracula was born in Transylvania, Romania. He ruled Wallachia, Romania off and on from 1456 to 1462. Some historians describe him as just yet brutally cruel ruler who valiantly fought off Ottoman Empire. He earned his nickname because his favorite way to kill his enemy was to impale them on a wooden stake. According to legend, Vlad Dracula enjoyed dining at his dying victims and dipping his breath in their blood. Whether those gory tales are true is known. Many people believe this story sparks Stoker's imagination to create Count Dracula, who was also from Transylvania, sucked his victims' blood, and could be killed by driving a stake through his heart. He is the one who started all the legends involving vampires. There are almost as many different characteristics of vampires as there are vampire legends, but the main characters of vampires is they drink human blood. They typically drain their victims' blood using their sharp fangs, killing them and turning them into vampires. In general, vampires hunt at night since sunlight weakens their powers. Some may have the ability to morph in a bat or a wolf. Vampires have a super strange and often have hypnotic sensual effect on their victims. They can see their image in a mirror and cast no shadows.
Borrowing from European traditions, Americans began to dress up in costumes and go house to house asking for food or money, a practice that eventually became today's trick-or-treat tradition. Young women believed that on Halloween they could divine the name or appearance of their future husband by doing tricks with yarn, apple appearance, or mirrors. In the late 1800s, there was a move in America to mold Halloween into a holiday more about community and neighborly get-togethers than about ghosts, pranks, and witchcraft. At the turn of the century, Halloween parties for both children and adults became the most common way to celebrate the day. Parties focused on games, foods of the season, and festive costumes. Parents were encouraged by newspapers and community leaders to take anything frightening or grotesque out of Halloween celebrations. Because of these efforts, Halloween lost most of its superstitious and religious overtones by the beginning of the 20th century. The American Halloween tradition of trick-or-treating probably dates back to the early All Souls Day parades in England. During the festivities, poor citizens would beg for food and families would give them parties called soul cakes in return for their promise to pray for the family's dead relatives. The distribution of soul cakes was encouraged by the church as a way to replace the ancient practice of leaving food and wine for roaming spirits. The practice, which was referred to as going souling, was eventually taken up by children who would visit the houses in their neighborhood, and he given Ale food and money. The tradition of dressing in costume for Halloween has both European and Celtic. Hundreds of years ago, winter was an uncertain and fiery time. Food supplies often ran low, and for the many people afraid of the dark. The short days of winter were full of constant worry. On Halloween, when it was believed that ghosts came back to the early world, people thought that they would incur worse if they left their homes. To avoid being recognized of these ghosts, people would wear masks when they left their homes after dark, so that the ghosts would mistake them for fellow spirits.